After 135 years, nothing has changed, and everything has changed. Archbishop John Ireland founded a small Catholic liberal arts college where faith and reason walk together. He opened the doors to Irish immigrants seeking to liberate their minds and change their destinies. And the rest is history. Our Catholic convictions continue to guide us in everything we do. We're working to make this world a better place, and we just can't stand still. We have the vision, passion, and momentum to embrace the future. We've transformed into a comprehensive urban university with 8 colleges, 10,000 students, and more than 110,000 alumni strong. We're all about change. It's in our DNA. We are going beyond Minnesota and taking our place on the national stage. We have no tolerance for intolerance. We will be the partner of choice for companies looking for major talent and for communities looking to solve major problems. So we can wake up to a better tomorrow. After 135 years, nothing has changed. And everything has changed.
It's a beautiful inheritance that we have. It started with the establishment of churches and schools and hospitals by religious orders. You can look at our cities and they're anchored by the co-cathedrals of the Basilica of St. Mary and the Cathedral.
It's really so many people over the years that have stepped up and said that they can make a difference.
We are privileged as a Catholic Community Foundation to work with donors who remember that and believe that their success and their family's success is because of that inheritance, and they're totally committed to passing it on.
There's a chance for all of us to share with the next generation how important it is to just give.
That loyalty and commitment to community has translated through multiple generations, and they believe that the gospel teachings encourage them to do that, and they can't turn from that.
Twin Cities Prison Ministry, host of today's forum, provides an active and meaningful Catholic presence to those affected by incarceration, in unity with all Christian prison ministry by promoting the many opportunities and activities in which lay people across the country can engage. Among the works of mercy all of us are called to participate in is caring for our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated and for their families who remain within our communities. Twin Cities Prison Ministry enables volunteers to answer this call by offering programs both outside and inside prison walls. Individuals can engage independently in small Christian communities or as congregations. From outside the walls, we can join prayer warriors and answer the call to pray independently for other volunteers who devote their time to ministering within the walls, on retreats, or for other concerns of those affected by incarceration. We can become a pen pal with an inmate through a safe and secure process that reaffirms that an inmate is not forgotten, has value, and provides hope that they can successfully return upon release. We can begin a birthday card program anonymously sending love to an inmate at a significant point in their incarceration. We can participate in Angel Tree, providing holiday gifts to the children of incarcerated moms and dads within our communities. And we can form a Families of Incarcerated Support and Hope group, a support group providing the opportunity for families to meet and share with one another. And we can participate in producing weekly 30-minute Ignatian meditation videos that are shown in facilities, based on whatever time you're able to provide, from 15 minutes to an hour, as many times throughout the year as you are available. From inside the walls, we can participate in Bible study groups, become one-on-one mentors to an inmate, participate as a team member on weekend retreats. And while the inside the walls activities are on hold during COVID, they are an essential part of answering the call to care for those in prison once restrictions have been lifted. 95% of all men and women who are serving time will one day be released back into our communities. The hope and support we provide during their incarceration has a significant impact on their ability to return and successfully reintegrate, once again becoming contributing members of our communities. Your support is needed to make that possible. Won't you join us? For more information on the Twin Cities Prison Ministry and the programs they provide, please go to www.tcprisonministry.com.
You can tell how excited we are to have you. I could interrupted the videos. Again, on behalf of President Sullivan, happy to say that you are all very welcome to our campus and to our new beautiful Iverson Center for the Faith. It sits adjacent to a newly refurbished Chapel of St. Thomas that shows really the centrality of faith here at the university. We have a marvelous program today. We're delighted also, as always, to have the Archbishop on campus and our other keynote speaker, one of our proud alum and former instructor at the university. Our moderator today and director will be Steve Hawkins. Steve is a longtime member of the Twin Cities Prison Ministry Board of Directors, one of the co-coordinators of this event. And in my mind, even though he did graduate from St. John's, he has been a model for social justice and social charity in the Archdiocese for years. I turn it over to Steve.
Dr. Brady, thank you very much. And I'd like to extend our heartfelt thank you to the University of St. Thomas Office of Mission on hosting us here today. I'd also like to thank the Catholic Community Foundation for their significant support to make this event possible. We began planning back in the late stages of 2019, and it wasn't until the university and the Catholic Community Foundation came together with us in partnership that this event truly became reality. Again, I express my sincere gratitude to them for their help in making our event possible. I'd like to extend my thank you also today to all of the panelists who will be participating in both sessions. We are divided into two sessions. Our morning session with the Archbishop and the Commissioner, our first session with the Archbishop and the Commissioner, and then our second half today will be with chaplains from local institutions. So we do have two parts. Christian prison ministry in a time of change, finding the future together. How do we do that? Our emphasis today will be, hopefully, beginning a conversation that brings together all of the pertinent parties to answer that question. Your help, your input is essential. Again, I urge you to write your questions down and submit them, but be part of our conversation, not only today, but as we move forward. In our Pledge of Allegiance, we proclaim ourselves one nation under God. So it's only fitting today to begin with a prayer. To lead us in that effort, I call upon the Right Reverend Bernard Hebda, Archbishop of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, to lead us.
Thank you, Steve. Let us begin by asking our God to bless us and to bless this day. Loving God, we thank you for the opportunities that you've given to us this day to love you and to serve you. We thank you for bringing us together to discuss this important topic. We thank you for the incredible service that's offered by those in this room and those who are participating at a distance in reaching out to our brothers and sisters who are in need. Brothers and sisters, truly. We ask you to send your Holy Spirit upon this gathering to help us as Christians focused on prison ministry to really discern wisely and well the path that you have set forward for us so that we might be able to truly share your love and your hope in our apostolic work. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Christian prison ministry in a time of change, finding the future together. But why? Why should you and I be concerned about those members of our society who have been convicted of a crime and are serving the sentences imposed upon them. The old adage rings in our ears: they did the crime, now let them do the time. Our first speaker today brings a strong legal background to our discussion, having completed his undergraduate studies at Harvard and earned his law degree at Columbia University before entering private practice in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In 1984, he left private practice and entered the St. Paul Seminary in Pittsburgh, where he was ordained a priest in 1989 and went on to earn his degree in canon law, eventually to be named Under-Secretary of the Pontifical Council by the then Pope John Paul II, today's Saint John Paul II. Prior to his current position as Archbishop of St. Paul in Minneapolis, he served as Bishop of Gaylord, Michigan, and Newark, New Jersey. Won't you please help me welcome the Right Reverend Bernard Hebda.
Thank you. Gathered in this group, I sometimes wonder if I'm not the wrong reverend, because here I am, I'm asked to speak on this topic of how can prison ministry, faith communities, and prison staff and programs work to collaborate together to serve incarcerated persons going forward. And I realize that you are the experts in this. I'm just always overwhelmed when I see the way in which people respond to the Lord's call to serve, in whether it be in formalized ways or in informal ways, and knowing that even an event like this, it has to be a partnership, right? So when you think about the different groups that came together today, I saw Steve was wearing the insignia of the Knights of Malta, and when you look at the Twin Cities Prison Ministry brochure, you'll see mention of what it is that the Knights of Malta are doing. Or I see Deacon Mickey's here from the Office for Mission that's affiliated with the Archdiocese. We saw beautiful videos from Twin Cities Prison Ministry and from Catholic Community Foundation. We know about the commitment of St. Thomas. And so you realize that to be able to really be effective in our ministry, in our work, that we have to be able to work together. You'll notice there's a heavy representation of deacons from the Archdiocese, and they've really taken on the flag of engaging in this ministry throughout our Archdiocese, and I'm so proud of them. But just before I share a few remarks, and I'm going to be drawing heavily today on Pope Francis. He's an interesting enough figure that I hope that those of you who aren't Catholic will find it intriguing as well. He certainly has a great love for prison ministry. But just to mention, as Steve had said, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and if you've ever been to Pittsburgh, it's that city that's kind of wedged in between those three rivers. And when you go to downtown, is right at the triangle there. They call it the Golden Triangle. But the most remarkable building there is a complex that was built by the architect H.H. Richardson. And not to suggest that Minneapolis would imitate Pittsburgh in any ways, but if you go to City Hall in Minneapolis, that's the style that's there. And so when I was a young boy, we lived right across the river from downtown, and every time that I would come through downtown with my parents, I would see the county jail there that was built by H.H. Richardson. And I'd say, Mom and Dad, I'd love to live there someday, because it was such a magnificent structure, right? It was just, and it's no longer used as the jail, but it always, I think, was really helpful in our community to see this magnificent structure that was dedicated to how it is that we rehabilitate our brothers and sisters who are in need. And so it's from that perspective a little bit of recognizing that this has to be a priority for us, that I'd like to share just a few remarks with you this morning. I mentioned I would be drawing heavily on Pope Francis and his comments. And when he was the Archbishop in Buenos Aires in Argentina, he would go regularly to the prisons. Not long ago, he released a statement, and at least it seems from that he still calls in to one of the prisons in Buenos Aires every week for a dialogue there. That's the kind of priority that he has given to that ministry. You'll notice when he goes on international trips, he always make a point of stopping at a prison somewhere, not just being there, but spending time with prisoners. So when he came to the United States, for example, for the World Meeting of Families, he made a point of going to a prison in Philadelphia. And when you watch, especially in the, when it's a U.S. prison, when you're able to understand the language and see that, it's very moving to see the way in which prisoners react to having the Holy Father there. And one of I think he teaches us some important lessons that's there. And first of all is that in that ministry that we share, whether it be formally as prison ministers or in our faith communities and volunteers, or whether it's even those of you who work at our prisons, that we always have to have as the underlying foundation a notion of respect. I always love when I've been to Lino Lakes with Father Anderson, who's the pastor there. He always talks about the men not as people being incarcerated, but hello parishioners, right? Because they're in his parish. But it's that sense that they have the same respect, the same claim on his time as anyone else in the parish. But it's just that how important it is that we really strive for that kind of respect, whatever the work is that we're doing. And I know that you do that also well. But there's also, since it's a gathering for Christian prison ministry, to think about it from that Christian perspective too. Mother Teresa would often speak about the importance of recognizing Christ in the distressing disguise of the poor. And we think, for example, about that line in sacred scripture, I was a prisoner and you visited me. So how important it is as we're looking to figure out why it is that we have that respect. Obviously, it comes just from the gift of life, but also from the fact that person who's there, that man or that woman, is Christ. I was a prisoner and you visited me. Pope Francis has said this is Jesus' mandate for all of us, but especially for the bishop who's called to be father of everyone. It really has to be a priority for us in ministry because that's where we're going to experience Christ. I know I've participated in retreats with some of you who are gathered here today, and everybody always speaks about how those opportunities are always more meaningful for the volunteers than they might be for those who participate, because when we have those opportunities, we encounter Christ. So I think we always have to be thinking, are we really treating the incarcerated as we would treat Christ? I love the image on the brochure that's before you too. It's always good for us to remember that there was a time that Christ was a prisoner. When I was a little boy, we would go to a Polish parish, and one of their favorite statues there, we have, as Catholics have all these statues, was a picture of Jesus, not a picture of a statue, of Jesus, very much like the image on the brochure today. And as a little boy, I always called that Jesus in jail. But it was that we're always reminded that that not only Jesus was imprisoned, but also some of our great heroes of the faith. When we look at Peter and Paul and consider the time that they would have spent imprisoned. I had the opportunity to live in Rome for many years, and it's interesting that those places are real, where Peter and Paul, and there are debates about where exactly they would have been imprisoned, but they're places of pilgrimage. So those places, those prisons, can be places of holiness, and that has to be true today as well. One of the great churches in Rome is built around the chains of St. Peter that was supposedly when he was imprisoned. St. Peter in chains. But somehow or another, for us as Christians, we're able to see in that experience that Jesus had as a prisoner, that Peter and Paul and so many great men and women of faith throughout the centuries, that prisons can be a place where we encounter Christ, and where not only are we able to share the gospel, but where we are transformed. Pope Francis, when he visits a prison, almost always says, "But for God's grace, I could be here." And I think that helps us with that notion of basically of respect. Pope Francis writes, I want to tell you, every time I visit a prison, I ask myself, why them and not me? We can all make mistakes, all of us, and in one way or another, we have all made mistakes. I think that we, with that sense of the basic respect for human life, and I'm happy that when you go to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops website, when you look for where they talk about prison ministry, it's in the context of the church's pro-life activities, right? So it's a question of life. Just like we want to tend to those who are sick, we have to tend to all human life. But in a very special way, we have to imitate Jesus's particular love for the imprisoned. We think about his experience on Calvary Hill, where the saint that we call Saint Dismas, the prisoner who's next to him, in some ways has pride of place. We know that he's in heaven because of Jesus's promise to him. But it's not just that Jesus shows a priority for those who are in the criminal justice system at the moment of his death. You'll remember that when he begins his public ministry, when he goes into the synagogue and unrolls that scroll, one of the things that he talks about is proclaiming liberty to the captives. And we'll speak about that in a second, what that liberty might be. But for Jesus, there was always a preference for those who are imprisoned, those who are captive. And we as followers of Christ have to be willing to see that as well. So how is it that we do that, or what should be priorities as we engage in that work? And I would say that drawing on some of Pope Francis's teaching, that one of the most important things that we can do, or the ways in which we can, the prism through which we can look at our work, is to see us as enkindlers of hope. So whether we be prison ministers or volunteers or staff, that somehow or another, that if we're able to introduce hope and help really enkindle hope in the lives of those who are incarcerated, that gives us the greatest potential that's there. And in part, we always teach with our lips, but also with our lives. And so even in those interactions that we have with our brothers and sisters who are in prison, how is it that we demonstrate hope in our own lives? One of the most significant gatherings in the Year of Mercy, Pope Francis had called for a Year of Mercy, was that he brought together 1,000 men and women who had been incarcerated to St. Peter's Square. Now that would have been an interesting security detail, I suspect. But he brings together 1,000 inmates, and he says this: "Today we celebrate the Jubilee of Mercy for you and with you, our brothers and sisters who are imprisoned. Mercy, as the expression of God's love, is something we need to think about more deeply. Certainly, breaking the law involves paying the price, and losing one's freedom is the worst part of serving time because it affects us so deeply." And this is what I think is significant. He says, all the same, hope must not falter. Paying for the wrong we have done is one thing, but another thing entirely is the breath of hope, which cannot be stifled by anyone or anything. Our heart always yearns for goodness. We are in debt to the mercy that God constantly shows us, for he never abandons us. That's a quote from St. Augustine. We certainly have to recognize, and that was such a beautiful quotation that was here from Archbishop Ireland. I had forgotten about that, but when he talks about the past, the present, and the future. And one of the things as those enkindlers of hope that the Pope says that is so important to us is that we recognize that we have to be able to communicate to our brothers and sisters in prison that we cannot allow ourselves to be held captive by the past. Pope writes, true enough, even if we wanted to, we can never rewrite the past. But the history that starts today and looks to the future has yet to be written by the grace of God and your personal responsibility. So how is it that we, in the way that we interact in our ministry, in our volunteer work, in the letters that we write, that we're able to communicate that? And one of the things that Pope Francis always talks about is we're only able to do that effectively is if we see that in our own lives. So if we find that we don't have hope or that we're bound by our past, it's very difficult for us to engage in that work convincingly. And so we have to always be involved in that process of conversion ourselves. And ultimately, as we speak about that hope, and as what Jesus spoke about freedom for the captives, we have to be able to identify, though, that what we're speaking about is true freedom. It's not just physical freedom. It's not just being outside the walls of a jail or a prison. Pope Francis, in addressing prisoners in his own country, noted that the church's duty, one that she cannot renounce, he said, is to awaken within those who are incarcerated a desire for true freedom. You think about how many people are chained by addiction, for example, or by family situations, or commitments to vengeance, or just in general chained by sin. And so that as we go in and we speak about the freedom that Jesus wants to bring, it's not just that time when one would no longer be behind walls, but rather to look for that kind of freedom that the Lord desires for each of us. And that affects those of us who are there as ministers or as volunteers or as staff as well. At that same gathering in St. Peter's Square in the Year of Mercy, Pope Francis said this: "We forget that we are all sinners, and often without being aware of it, we too are prisoners. At times we are locked up within our own prejudices or enslaved to the idols of a false sense of well-being. At times we get stuck in our own ideologies or absolutize the laws of the market even as they crush other people. At such times we imprison ourselves behind the walls of individualism and self-sufficiency, deprived of the truth that sets us free." So as we go into the prisons, as we engage in this work, we have to be mindful of that in our own lives too, and work on that in a way that helps us to be credible evangelizers, to be credible bearers of Christ's hope. But ultimately, it's bringing that message that we have a loving Father who never tires of mercy. I had the opportunity to be in St. Peter's Square the first Sunday after Pope Francis was elected, and the whole world kind of came just to hear what this new Pope was going to say. It was really the first time, and they were squeezed in the square, and I remember that message, the very first Sunday, first time he has to address the world, and he talks about God's mercy. So he says, we have a Father who never tires of offering mercy. We might tire of asking for it, but we have a God who never tires. It was interesting because he did, he was a little bit of a tradition breaker. So, he told a joke. People didn't know if they could laugh or not, right? About this old woman in Argentina, and who talked about how important mercy is. And he made a crack about the Jesuit University in Rome, and all those, and people didn't know. And then he ended the whole thing with, "Have a good lunch," which is not normally how the Pope ends a discourse. But in the midst of that, you saw from coming out of the gate, the first thing that he talks about is God's mercy. And throughout his ministry, and I think that's something that he calls all of us to reflect upon, is that often is what transforms others, is that proclamation of God's mercy. So I'm always so delighted that what we have to do is strive to make that mercy present, help people to understand that our Heavenly Father is a merciful Father. And When I think about the beautiful Bible studies that go on in our prisons, and that's where we have that opportunity to be encounter with God's word, but most especially with his merciful heart, right? So that work is so important that you're doing. Or prayer groups as well, that we really come to know the merciful God in Scripture and to celebrate him in our prayer. For those from our Catholic tradition and Christian tradition as well, at different degrees, we see how the sacramental outreach of the church is so important for mercy as well. That's one of the things that we believe as you're preparing somebody for baptism, or as for the Catholics, as we're preparing people for the sacrament of reconciliation. It's a way of making God's mercy present in that situation in a way that's going to touch hearts and that's going to open for people that possibility of really believing that we have a merciful Father that helps us then to be men and women of hope, and that really reflects on the dignity of each human person. That example that we have a Heavenly Father who never lacks mercy should influence everything that we do, and indeed it should influence our prison systems. At breakfast, Commissioner Schell was talking about the huge issues that we face, and when we consider criminal justice these days, we always have to remember that we have a God who's merciful, who always sees that we have a future, who always recognizes the possibility of true conversion and aims for reconciliation. When I mentioned earlier about Pope Francis going to the prison in Philadelphia, and this is what he said: "This time in your life can only have one purpose, to give you a hand in getting back on the right road, to give you a hand to help you rejoin society. All of us are part of that effort. All of us are invited to encourage, help, and enable your rehabilitation. A rehabilitation which everyone seeks and desires, inmates and their families, correctional authorities, social and educational programs. A rehabilitation which benefits and elevates the morale of the entire community." But I love how he talks about all of us have to be part of that effort. So even those who are supporting our brothers and sisters who are imprisoned by prayers from within our faith communities, that's significant. It's something that we have to continue to encourage. That possibility of conversion and rehabilitation that the Holy Father spoke about, Pope Francis, applies not only to those who are incarcerated, but also to us in all three categories: those involved in ministry, those who are volunteers, those who are staff. We have to be able to forgive each other. It's so easy to judge others, so easy to hold some grudges. We need to let go and recognize that each of us has that potential for change. We need to assume the best about the other person. Just a word about those of you who work in our prison system, staff. And here in this local area, we have a connection in the Catholic world. We have, we all shoot to be saints. Only some of them are canonized saints, and a step before being declared a saint is to be declared a blessed. And we have an example of Blessed Solanus Casey, who was a guard at Stillwater Prison. So you think that it's the saintly one in the midst is not the priest going into the prison. It's not even the volunteer going into the prison, but it's the prison guard. So that there's that opportunity for all of us to have that kind of impact. They tell the story that Solanus would go on to become a priest, Capuchin, a Franciscan priest, and Franciscans don't own anything, but he always valued this little box that had been made for him in the wood shop at Stillwater prison by one of the younger brothers who were in jail because of a bank robbery with Jesse James and his brother. So imagine that there's always that possibility for all of us to have an impact on others and then to allow that to have an impact on us as well. Thank you very much for listening, just to set a little bit of a broad basis. Thanks.
Your Grace, thank you very much. If we then, as Christians, are called to visit the imprisoned, then how do we go about doing that? How do we answer the call that Christ gives us? For many of us, that call conjures up an image of Sister Helen Prejean walking Robert Lee Willie down the corridor to the execution chamber in Dead Man Walking. Minnesota doesn't have the death penalty, but then what are you and I called to do to answer Christ's call to us? Last year, officers Joseph Gom and Joseph Parisi both lost their lives while on duty. That led to stricter security for the safety of not only correctional staff and inmates, but we volunteers as well. COVID has only accentuated that problem. So what can we do? Here to help us understand the part that volunteers play in the correctional system and the tremendous challenges volunteers present to correctional staffs following the death of the two officers, the isolation as the result of COVID, and the racial tensions that have been heightened following the death of George Floyd, is the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell. Commissioner Schnell began his law enforcement career more than 20 years ago as a deputy in the Carver County Sheriff's Department. In 1999, most of us here in the Twin Cities became familiar with the name Paul Schnell as he appeared regularly on TV as the St. Paul Police Department Public Information Officer. Since then, he's gone on to be Chief of Police in Hastings, Inver Grove Heights, and Maplewood before being named Commissioner of the Department of Corrections by Governor Walz in January of 2019. Commissioner Schnell completed his undergraduate studies right here at the University of St. Thomas and did his graduate work just down the street at St. Kate's. Would you help me welcome Commissioner Schnell?
Thank you so much. It's really great to be back here. I think the day they handed me that diploma was probably not St. Thomas's proudest day, I gotta say, because I was thinking about what it would be like as a college student if Paul Schnell were here in these days, and it's hard to imagine. But I'm immensely grateful for this place, because I would tell you that it was really, I think, being in this, I came from a small town of 700 people and northeastern Wisconsin, and came here for college, and I think it was the first time that I think education challenged me to think about what it meant to be a person of faith and to apply that to the way you live. And as a social work major, ended up working in a halfway house here in St. Paul with men who were there as an alternative to incarceration. And it gave me such perspective that I had never, ever had in my life. And that has been profoundly influential throughout my time. I would just start by saying that there's an author, William White, who wrote this quote that I love. I have it hanging on the wall in my office. It says, "Being safe enough to have real wishes in life is the beginning of hope." And it prompts me to think about this whole notion of what is safety. And as I think about that notion of safety, I think about the places where oftentimes we feel most grounded. And for the people sitting in this room, that grounding is really about faith. And ultimately, as I think about our role, we have prisons not simply to create safety for the community. There is some who believe that that's what it's all about, that safety begins and ends at the wall or the fence of a prison, and that's simply not the case. That ultimately, for us, the people inside, in order to have a sense of an opportunity for transformation, have to feel a sense of safety. And frankly, that safety doesn't come from keeping the bars, keeping other people who are incarcerated from them. In fact, that sense of safety comes from the connection that our staff and all of you bring. And that's why I think we cannot underestimate the critical notion of what you and as prison ministers, what faith communities across our state do in order to create a sense of connection. Because without it, we are going to continue to have and struggle with the same kinds of outcomes. Over the past almost 2 years, since I started, we've engaged with staff and with incarcerated people and with family members of those incarcerated, with people in the broader advocacy community to think about what is the mission that we need to be engaged in. And how do we ultimately live that mission out? Ultimately, we landed in this notion of we exist to transform lives for a safer Minnesota. And so it's not about the fact that we exist to keep those who've done wrong in cages and to make Minnesota safer. We have to fundamentally be committed to this whole notion of transformation. And that transformation ultimately creates safety both for the broader community as well as for the people themselves. And I think as we look at what this means, and as we now, we spent the first year really trying to identify that mission and listen to and get the voice of as many people as we could, we now talk about how we live that out. And as challenging as things, horrific things, like the deaths of Officer Gum and Officer Parisi have been on the prison system, as ruthless as the whole COVID situation has been in terms of the deepening of disconnection between the people who are incarcerated and the community, I will tell you that it has prompted, I think, in us a depth of some level of reflection. And that reflection is how do we begin to break down and really think about the policies and the practices that we have that ultimately keep and maintain a level of disconnection. And we see this today, and I'll just give you one example that many of you are going to be quite familiar with, is that we say to volunteers that you can volunteer to come in, but you have to maintain or limit your contacts with people who are incarcerated, outside of that role. And yet here today, we have no volunteers coming into our prisons, and the very people who oftentimes have been the cornerstones of transformation, of hope, of safety, all of you and the members of faith communities are disconnected from that opportunity to connect with people. These are decisions. These are policies. And while they have had, and they were grounded in a rationale, I think situations that we face today are causing us to really lift up the questions of, are those policies the policies that ultimately cause us to have outcomes where in our state, recidivism rates have been the same for the last 40 years. For 40 years, we have not changed and made any shifts in terms of the difference in outcomes. I don't want to minimize the fact that there are people whose lives are being transformed. There are people who are experiencing incredible things inside. There are men and women that I've talked to who have said, they've talked about the programming delivered mostly by volunteers that have caused them to ultimately live an entirely and completely different life. And yet, I think as we think about where we go, we have to find ways to maintain and deepen those connections. In fact, broaden them. So as we start to think about where we sit today, we are reviewing and looking at our policies, and those policies, I believe, will change. We have to put safeguards in place. There has to be for both our volunteers as well as for the people we serve. There just has to be. At the same time, I think there are ways that we can do that and do that in ways that ultimately help us to deepen connections between the people who are in the system and the broader community that can lift them up and support them. We also, as we look at these policies and the changes in them, I think we are beginning to think about how it is that we process people through our system. And today, what ends up happening is you get sentenced and sent, and you either, if you're a woman, you will end up at Shakopee. If you're a man, you will go to St. Cloud. And you will be processed through an intake process and ultimately sent off to one of the prisons. There, you will hope that you have a strong case manager or a powerful or influential volunteer that knows the system a bit, that can help you navigate it. And while we have some knowledge about the people that come into our system, oftentimes it is focused on all the deficits and little of the strengths. Oftentimes, it is, we will say to them, you will have your opportunities to engage in transformational programming options as you choose. But some people may not experience the levels of support that are going to be necessary to have them feel safe enough to engage with others to ultimately experience hope, as William White said. And so, as we think about what the system looks like, we look to go to our legislature and begin having conversations about when people come into our system, that they will go through a comprehensive assessment process of dental and health, medical and mental health and substance use and vocational and educational, their strengths and their spiritual, where they sit spiritually. And from that assessment, ultimately a multidisciplinary team of people will sit around them to let them give voice to what it is they believe they need to do and the ways in which we as a system and community, because ultimately that's what our correctional facilities are. They are communities supported by staff who are part of that community, the men and women who live in those facilities, and the volunteers and broader community that comes in and is a part of them. And ultimately, we will create a pathway for people to be able to navigate that system. But one of the core and critical and key differences is that in addition to all those kind of general assessments, one of the most important ones is that we will begin to talk about who it is that are going to provide the foundational supports in the community, those pro-social supports, those connections. And we know that there are some people who come into our system who sadly have very few. very few at all. And we know that others have perhaps many, but there has been disconnection for a whole host of reasons, oftentimes grounded in the very reasons the person happens to be in that correctional facility in the first place. So ultimately, as we think about how it is that we lift up and do the work of providing transformational opportunities for the men and women that are in our correctional facilities, transformational connection with the people who volunteer in them, we also look to find ways to lift up the support systems that exist in the community, because oftentimes they themselves are experiencing that imprisonment, that incarceration, that systemic involvement in ways that are equally profound, often unsupported, making it that much more difficult for that person who is returning to experience and achieve and realize a level of success. And so what we think is, what we believe it is that in order to do this, in order to make this shift, we cannot be as correctionally centric. Good corrections means stronger community, period. And we have to find ways to do that meaningfully. And frankly, the people that are here today, the people that are involved in this and watching this from their homes, you are the people that are going to ultimately create the safety that is going to allow people to experience hope. I would just close by this. I think one of the most humbling experiences for me in this role, I think, is Minnesota law, one of 4 states in the country that has the commissioner is the ultimate parole authority for people who are serving life sentences. And every month, I have the opportunity to sit with 4, 5, 6 men or women who are serving life sentences, and to talk about the hope of one day experiencing a level of redemption that would allow them to be back in the community. And while it is an awesome responsibility that I take very seriously, I can't tell you how profound those meetings have been for me. Oftentimes in the mornings, meeting with those people who were left behind as a result of the very crime for the person I'm going to meet in that afternoon. And the struggles around the paradigm of redemption and where people are, and how, as people of faith, we lift up not only those people who engaged in acts of wrongdoing, but that we have to and need to ultimately lift up and support the people who've been affected by crime. Because I truly believe that the day that community lifts up and holds up their experiences, their worth, their value, the reality of their loss, and can equally lift up and support and care about the people who've engaged in wrongdoing, that is the day when mission will be achieved, and frankly, oftentimes would be the ways that we live out our faith. And so I think the call and the need is great. The hope that exists in rooms like this and people who may be dialing in from home, to me, this is opportunity. And if we truly want a safer Minnesota, a fairer Minnesota, a Minnesota that has less division by race and leaving people behind, it demands that those of us who do this work bring along people into the nature of this work because we are working to help transform the lives of those in the system. We also, I think, as the Archbishop talked about, demonstrate in the way we live, in the way we help others see the world. And that is the stories of the fact that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. And with that, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to be here, and I can't thank you enough for the work you do.
Commissioner Schnell, thank you very much. A question. We spoke about, you spoke about the critical part that volunteers play, both inside and outside the walls, and the issues that our institutions face today because of the restrictions of COVID, security issues. When do you perceive a potential return to ministry for volunteers?
Great question, kind of complicated one at that. I would just say that we want to make that happen as quickly as possible. Many of you know that we've recently reopened visiting as long as we don't have a threshold of positivity in the facilities. And that was really developed in consultation with the Department of Health. And so we are doing that. We are experiencing some success. That said, as we watch what's happening with community spread of COVID, we're seeing that among staff, right? So we're very mindful of how we do this, and it changes every day. Every morning, I'm in a briefing, and we are looking at test results, those who are symptomatic inside the facilities, and Minnesota's been, I think, doing a good job. It's really a testament to staff and the people who are incarcerated have been incredibly, I think, have done amazing in terms of what's been happening. But we still face challenges. We do have people who have significant vulnerabilities, but we anticipate our next step here is that we are, right now, we're about 4 weeks into into visiting. And we have directed the staff to begin to plan for the return of volunteers, and it would be a very similar threshold that we would be looking to have. And so it can change very quickly, and so we need to be able to notify people. And right now, that threshold is whenever there's 2 or more positive cases in the facility, or either those who reside there or those who work there. The visiting is closed, and we want to contain that as quickly as possible. Right now, you can look at what's happening at the women's facility in Waseca. There's about 140, 150 positive cases there. It's really, they had transferred some people in, and ultimately they had that experience. So I would anticipate within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to be seeing guidance come out around the return of that, and it will probably be slowly, and chaplaincy and the volunteer coordinators will be working with what that looks like, but we really taking our guidance from the Department of Health.
Thank you. Your Grace, you spoke about Christ's call to this particular ministry, and yet I think as a society, when we begin to engage in the works of mercy, it somehow becomes easier for us to do the feeding the hungry or sheltering the homeless. And by the time we get down our list of works of mercy, we run out of time or energy by the time we get to visiting the imprisoned. How do we change that within our community? How does the church become more engaged in encouraging its members to take up this essential call that Christ asks us each to?
Yes. Thank you. Good question. I think preaching has a lot to do with that, Steve. I think to the extent that the priests and the deacons, as they engage their communities, to always put this as as a priority for us, reflecting Christ's own priority, I think that would be very helpful. But I can tell you a little bit in terms of my own experience is that we have many people who would like to do more than what they're presently doing in this area. And, you know, it's somewhat easier to find opportunities for feeding the poor than it is sometimes to be able to work the way through the system to be able to really engage in that kind of connectedness that the commissioner was talking about. So when I know when so many people, as I mentioned earlier, that when they have the experience of a retreat experience or sacramental prayer, they want to do more, but because of limitations in the system, that's so hard for people to be able to do that. So on the one hand, we certainly need to encourage people to be praying more and to think of other and creative ways of supporting our brothers and sisters who are in prison. But I also hope that we'll be able to find some ways for people to be able to respond to that call so that they'll, because I like the commissioner, see that connectedness is so important, to see that we might be able to expand those opportunities. I realize COVID's a challenging situation at the moment, but post-COVID, to look for those opportunities for our volunteers to do more rather than less.
Thank you. We've wound up with a tremendous number of questions, and we'll only be able to address a few of those. I'll try to get answers out to questions following this presentation. But Commissioner Schnell, we have several people asking about the long-term strategic plan and its relationship to the faith community. Could you just brief us a bit on what those plans might be with reference to reopening?
Yes, as we think about what happens in our long haul, as we think about how we live out our mission, as we think about even how we change the way we operate our systems, we will need to have both prison ministry and all of the related programs will become part and parcel to the plans that the men and women who are in the system will put together, and we will support the community, and the staff will support. And ultimately, what we want to do is provide ways to incentivize people to do that. That by engaging, the deepening of engagement allows people to actually be released earlier and ultimately have their sentence discharged earlier. And so the role of community in that, the role of faith communities, the role of people helping them to achieve that outcome is really about how do we build a more humane, reasonable, and safe correctional system that frankly helps them better support themselves, their families. And so we believe that part of that assessment and part of the programming options that we front and load. We don't wait till the month or 2 months before they get out. We are doing that from day one, focusing on all the transformational ways and engagements that need to happen.
Thank you. Gentlemen, from a time perspective, let me ask just one last question. Where do we go from here? How do we collectively remain engaged so that in the near future, the issues we spoke about, the issues we face as a society, with reference to our treatment of the incarcerated, changes? Your Grace.
Great, thanks.
I want to see what he says first.
Yes, no, I think that discussions like this morning are very helpful so people have that opportunity to say what does the faith community have to bring to this situation. And certainly I think there's a great desire on the part of faith communities throughout our area to be involved. We certainly want to be partners in that. I know in terms of there's great prayer potential certainly around this area, so I think that's going to be significant. But I think to continue to have those discussions where the faith dimension of life in achieving those goals that you spoke about, Commissioner, are important, and certainly as we see those opportunities opening up, we'll be sure to continue to promote among our communities this as being something that's an admirable work, and I think we'll find the volunteers. But I think there has to be that appreciation for how it is that we help the system to achieve goals in a way that's based on our own sense of the dignity of each human person and the transforming effect of the Christian message.
And I would just say very simply and quickly that I think one of the biggest challenges we face, and I say this about even myself at times, and certainly about our staff, but I think in our communities, is the challenge. We need to challenge both heads and hearts of people to really understand and think about what does it mean to be redemptive? What does it mean to provide people with the opportunity to become whole? And when that happens, I think this is one of the biggest, I think, challenges, oftentimes, even for people of faith, to think about what somebody did versus who and what they are. And I think we and you all doing what you do can tell stories about the experience of these people in ways that help bring people along and see the potential and opportunity that exists in redemption.
Thank you both. We are most grateful for your time and information today, and we look forward to working together in the future to find a better way to address this issue. We will take a 5-minute break and then come back and begin with our prison chaplain panel. Stay tuned.
After 135 years, nothing has changed, and everything has changed. Archbishop John Ireland founded a small Catholic liberal arts college where faith and reason walk together. He opened the doors to Irish immigrants seeking to liberate their minds and change their destinies. And the rest is history. Our Catholic convictions continue to guide us in everything we do.
We're working to make this world a better place, and we just can't stand still.
We have the vision, passion, and momentum to embrace the future. We've transformed into a comprehensive urban university with 8 colleges, 10,000 students, and more than 110,000 alumni strong. We're all about change. It's in our DNA.
We are going beyond Minnesota and taking our place on the national stage. We have no tolerance for intolerance.
We will be the partner of choice for companies looking for major talent and for communities looking to solve major problems.
So we can wake up to a better tomorrow.
After 135 years, nothing has changed. And everything has changed.
It's a beautiful inheritance that we have. It started with the establishment of churches and schools and hospitals by religious orders. You can look at our cities and they're anchored by the co-cathedrals of the Basilica of St. Mary and the Cathedral.
It's really so many people over the years that have stepped up and said that they can make a difference.
We are privileged as a Catholic Community Foundation to work with donors who remember that and believe that their success and their family's success is because of that inheritance, and they're totally committed to passing it on.
There's a chance for all of us to share with the next generation how important it is to just give.
That loyalty and commitment to community has translated through multiple generations, and they believe that the gospel teachings encourage them to do that, and they can't turn from that.
In the past 50 years, prison populations in America have risen nearly sevenfold, from 300,000 in 1970 to more than 2.3 million in 2020. At that same time, our general population has risen approximately 1.6 times, from 205 million in 1970 to 331 million in 2020. Our prison population is rising at a rate more than 4 times our general population. At that rate, by the year 2070, our prison population will be a staggering 16 million, nearly 3 times the current population of the entire state of Minnesota. America, land of the free, incarcerates a greater percent of its population than any other country in the world. We do so at a rate 6 times higher than that of our neighbor to the north, Canada. Our get tough on crime philosophy doesn't appear to have the anticipated outcome. Quite the contrary. Of our incarcerated population, more than 95% will eventually be released and return to our communities. Nationally, 2 of every 3 of those individuals will return to incarceration within 3 years. In Minnesota, the rate of return is half the national average, 1 of every 3. Contrary to popular belief, these rates of recidivism are not an indication that an individual is a career criminal, rather the result of a society that continues to punish those who have served time for crimes of which they have been convicted. Society carries out this continued punishment by collectively denying citizens equal access to affordable housing and equal access to good jobs. Without housing or a living wage work opportunity, an individual has 2 choices: a homeless shelter or a return to state-sponsored housing. The Minnesota Department of Correction figures find that when an inmate has contact with the outside world during their incarceration, when they know they are not forgotten and that their lives have value, their chances of returning upon release drop from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 20. When we care for men and women during their incarceration, their chances of returning upon release drop by 7-fold. At that rate, our projected incarcerated population in 2070 could drop by 7-fold, not increase by 7-fold. Our incarcerated population could return to 300,000 nationally, not explode to 16 million nationally. If, as the Minnesota Department of Corrections statistics project, we can reduce our incarcerated population by 7-fold versus increasing it by 7-fold, what must we do and how do we do it? Twin Cities Prison Ministry can help through programs designed to safely and securely engage volunteers in providing an active and meaningful presence to those affected by imprisonment. From outside the walls, we can join prayer warriors and answer the call to pray independently for other volunteers who devote their time to ministering within the walls, on retreats, or for other concerns of those affected by incarceration. Become a pen pal with an inmate through a safe and secure process that reaffirms that an inmate is not forgotten, has value, and provides hope that they can successfully return upon release. We can begin a birthday card program anonymously sending love to an inmate at a significant point in their incarceration. We can participate in Angel Tree, providing holiday gifts to the children of incarcerated moms and dads within our communities. And we can form a Families of Incarcerated Support and Hope group, a support group providing the opportunity for families of the incarcerated to meet and share with one another. From inside the walls, we can participate in Bible study groups. We can become one-on-one mentors to an inmate, participate as a team member on weekend retreats. And while inside the walls activities are on hold during COVID, they are an essential part of answering the call to care for those in prison once those restrictions have been lifted. 95% of all women and men who are serving time will one day be released back into our communities. The hope and support we provide during their incarceration has a significant impact on their ability to return and successfully reintegrate, once again becoming contributing members of our communities. Your support is needed to make that possible. Won't you join us? For more information on the Twin Cities Prison Ministry and the programs they provide, please go to www.tcprisonministry.com. In the past 50 years, prison populations in America...
Welcome back. We hope that our audience with us distantly is ready to settle in for the next few minutes as we discuss some of the real issues of how we might engage with prison ministry inside the walls from the people who do it on a daily basis. We're going to hear from three individuals who live their lives ministering to those inside the walls. And then we're going to open it up again for questions at the end. First, let me introduce Chaplain Linda Lee. Linda is the chaplain at the Lino Lakes facility here in Minnesota. Linda?
Thank you. So, my way of living is my way of being, is my way of thinking. So, I approach my job with the questions of who am I and why am I here? Oddly, those are not oddly, those are the questions that everyone comes to my table with too. A very significant thing is that I will tell anyone who said, "You are so brave to work in a men's facility." I came from Oak Park. What do you mean? I've never had a criminal sitting with me at my table. So a little bit about me and how my lens in how I plan and how I creatively make space for the residents and for volunteers to come and live together with love and generosity is, first of all, I am wired to advocate for the oppressed. And I know this because from the time I could dress myself, and that was not just a couple years ago, contrary, and this doesn't need ironing, but from the time I could dress myself, I was creating dialogue between my left foot and right foot. Whose sock would win to put on? Of course I had control, but I made sure that the left won a little more. So to know where I begin and end, control or do not control, that was always part of my subconscious. And I am the beneficiary of generous love. During my first internship, my second semester in seminary, at the age of 57, after growing up in a mainline denominational church, Lutheran, after serving 13 years on the mission field in foreign missions, where the position description was soul winning, after learning to tell myself the truth that my first assumption about people was many times wrong, I saw that I do not bring God to anyone. I see God in everyone. I see God already there. And so this new way of seeing brings to me a new way of being that I walk with because we are in a chaotic world. And the stories of comfort that we choose is how we manage our terror of living a human experience. We are spiritual beings living a human experience. How do we walk together? And I know that I am my best self when I'm a listener, to speak less and listen more. And I give mad props to Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton, because that song is great. That dialogue is great. Speak less and listen more. And it's not passive listening, it's deep listening, to be continually curious about making space for the story being told, honoring the story that you are holding space for, that they're trusting you with. And to be attentive, to be reflective, and fully present with love and compassion for who is speaking, and not distracted by planning a response. My response is this heart chakra that is opening and active and holding space for safety to trust me with the story. So the space and time is for making meaning together, to walk with, to stay with, and accompany. So why am I here? That's all of the above. And I heard a lot, and our title of this forum is about walking into the future. And I propose that everything you do in the now changes the future. That future anxiety, future waiting, that's a capital account. We don't have, we just don't have that emotional or social capital for it. Whatever we do in the present moment will change how we are as we walk the next moment. And that is the discussion I have with every resident who comes to my table. This is our hammock, to be held by the love of God, to receive an idea of who you really are, not this story that's spun out in trauma, in poverty. We are all translators of our experience, and so we will always have our particular lens. So that's why it was important to me to let you know my lens of holding space for spiritual care. Jesus was a great upender. He was, I call him, opposite man. And parables were subversive speech in that context. Jesus, I believe, marches in solidarity, and his sign, his placard would have been, Samaritan Lives Matter. I would say that the poor, his comments and his quotes of Old Testament scripture, the poor will always be with you, mean that you're going to be in there with the poor. You're not going to be their arm's length and then going back to, I don't know, I could say something, I'm not going to say that. You will be where the poor are. You will be where they live. And so I also heard this morning that Minnesota does not have a death penalty, and I would propose that we consider poverty, injustice it's an unearned death penalty in our communities. As you don't wait to come in, but pay attention to the many grandmothers and grandfathers raising children of incarcerated individuals. The soup kitchens, the other ministries, they are not separate, they are all connected, and that is your now that changes every tomorrow. More and more, we see a demographic where church affiliation and church attendance is not a reliable indicator of spiritual life. Our statistics worldwide show that. And now that we are not meeting in churches, in buildings, together in gathering spaces, we are still the church. We are still the church. And we have found anew the deepest meanings of our rituals and gatherings, because we've had to adapt now in Rosh Hashanah. How do you blow the shofar? Where do you blow it? Where's it going to be? How are we going to gather when we can't do this together? We did Ramadan. How do we do this? We do it differently. But it caused us to revisit these basic, beautiful sacraments, tangible evidence of this intangible spirit. So we show up. We prepare to be changed by every conversation. That is not passive. That is holding space with the energy of great love. Just as we are learning to retool, as the world is all over, God is not out there, but right here, right here, right here.
Chaplain Linda, thank you. Our second panelist this morning is the Right Reverend Martin Shanahan from the Minnesota Department of Corrections facility at Stillwater.
Morning, everyone, and I should say, well, almost afternoon. Yeah, still good morning. I do want to say thank you for and to Twin Cities Prison Ministry, all the amazing, actually, volunteers who continue to serve in all of our facilities. And I know I speak on behalf of all of our chaplains, even though all of us can't be here, that without you, our ministries, our outreach, our connections, as Commissioner Snell pointed out, would be significantly less. So I really do say thank you from the bottom of my heart. for all that you do and continue to do. You know, my friends, I actually believe that justice, its best definition is that it's establishing right relationship. Justice is about right relationship. What happens in our current prison system based on retribution rather than restoration is it violates every relationship that we have in our lives. I believe that what corrections ought to be is a system and a possibility of reconnection, a possibility of restoration, not retribution. Commissioner Schnell is committed to that over and over again in his ministry, in his leadership, in his encouragement, and his challenge for us inside and us on the outside as well. I truly honor this time together. I truly honor the questions that we'll explore together, and I look forward to working with you even deeper as we look forward together, because I love that, finding a future together, not apart, not pushing against each other, but walking with one another. I have in my office, I'll close with this, a sign that has really, truly impacted my life. Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit who actually founded Po' Boy Industries in Los Angeles, he said this: only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of ever changing the world. I hope that we can walk in those words. Thank you.
Right, Reverend, thank you. And our final panelist this morning is Elise Goebel from the Minnesota Correctional Facility at Red Wing. Elise?
Good morning. It is such a privilege to be able to work at the correctional facility in Red Wing. I do believe we are the most unique correctional facility in the sense that we have juveniles in our custody. We have juvenile boys ages 14 to 21 with the average age of 17.5. And if you think about being a 17-year-old in prison, imagine how scary that is for them. Imagine going through the incarceration process and then ending up in our walls in Red Wing. And yes, we are part of the Department of Corrections, but when you go into our community, when you come into our facility, we are part of the DOC, but we refer to ourselves as a training school. We are a treatment program for youth. When the residents come in, kind of piggybacking on what Commissioner said, when the residents come in, we have a treatment plan that they go through. We do many assessments. They meet with chemical dependency counselors, therapists, trauma. And then they sit down with a team and they come up with their own individualized plan on how they're going to become successful young men. And the other beautiful part about juvenile corrections is it's an indeterminate sentence. So how long they're at Red Wing is that individualized treatment plan. And there are no two plans that are the same. So when they come in, they go through therapy, they work with our volunteers, they work with our corrections officers, they're going to school full-time, they're going to chemical dependency. Whatever the therapies they need, they're receiving their services. The residents that are in our custody, they're all from the state of Minnesota. Our #1 county is Hennepin right now, and our second county is Ramsey. Since I've started, that's been the norm. And you know, we have an ultimate responsibility for these young men that are in our care. And when they talk about our program, when they talk about their successes, they always refer back to our volunteer programs. They always refer back to guitar lessons that they had with one of our volunteers, their math tutor, their basketball. We have a coach that comes in and does basketball clinics. And so, you know, they talk about those experiences that they've had in Red Wing and the mentor program too, which I think is one of our most successful programs, their mentor. And so for the volunteers that are in this room, for the volunteers that are listening at home, I thank you. I thank you for remembering Red Wing and for serving our youth.
Elise, thank you very much. I'd like to ask a couple of questions and get the group's reaction, because as volunteers, as men and women who answer Christ's call, to serve the imprisoned. We need to know a little bit more about how do we do that effectively assists you in serving our brothers and sisters inside. What is it that we can do as volunteers that makes a significant impact on the outcomes that Commissioner Schnell referred to haven't changed in 40 years? How do we make a difference in what we do?
Oh, so when volunteers can come back into the facilities, which, you know, we're all hoping soon, what we're looking for is come and share your gifts and talent with our youth. Come and lead guitar lessons, tutor. We have our mentor program, and that's really the program that we desperately need volunteers for. We did a study a couple years ago, and we found out that 50% of our residents never receive a visit. The 50% that do receive a visit, 25% of them received a visit one time. So these youth, they need mentors, they need positive adults in their world. And so we've established a mentor program, and we have volunteers that come in, and we assign them to a youth, and they meet in our visiting room. And, you know, sometimes they go over, you know, the residents want to share their gifts and talents. They share their poetry. They go over their homework. They play games. Sometimes they just come in and they play Uno or cribbage, read the scripture. The volunteers follow the direction of the residents and fill those needs. And for some of our guys, the kids will talk about, well, I know Grandma Lois is going to show up every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and she's the first adult that I can count on being there. And it's powerful. It's powerful that a lot of the volunteers that come in are retirees. They're grandma and grandpas. And, you know, we call them Grandpa Jim, Grandma Lois. And the kids so enjoy the visits. And because for some sense, it's a break in their day. It's a break. It's a positive adult who's listening to them, who wants to know their feelings and thoughts. It's not a therapy session. It's not a group meeting. It's just a one-on-one mentoring. And so that is what we're really looking for at Red Wing. And just sharing any other gifts and talents, mock interviews if you're a business person and you can interview and help the kids learn how to interview, resume building, any transitional services as well. Maybe it's just a one-time guest speaking where you talk about insurance plans, because we need to prepare these residents for their release. Our average length of stay is only 230 days, so they're not in our custody a long time. And so as many exposures as we can have for them, that's what we're looking for at Red Wing.
Anyone?
You're talking about, it's interesting because there's very little real estate of time and place to provide equally for all spiritual traditions. So we need to be very, I believe, wise. I think there are volunteer opportunities that are not faith named, but people of faith in those places is more important than ever. Go and live your faith alongside as a tutor, in education, those kinds of things, and bring your expertise as a mentor even into the adult facilities through the already developed programs that are coming in. Minnesota Prison Writers Workshop. There are other, like yoga, there are other, just holding space for people, being you with them is so important. I was a volunteer for 6 years doing CARIS teams in prison, which led me to say, I want to go to seminary. I graduated from seminary the week I turned 60 years old. And all this takes a lot of time to look good. I'm 66, and I want to do this as long as I have breath. So be curious, be involved, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Be you in anything with them.
And let me just add one more if I can, Steve. Pray. We've heard it all today. We've heard it a couple different times, and different people have said it. Archbishop said it. if I had a print shop, I'd print a ton of these as bumper stickers. Prayer changes things. And if we had a subtitle underneath it, I would put parenthetically, us. Us. Prayer. Pray about and for not only the people who are involved in the institutions and the people who are institutionalized, who are inmates, those entrusted to our custody and care. Pray for us as staff. Pray for the commissioner. Pray for those who are entrusted with the leadership to have the wisdom and the insight. Because prayer does change who and how we are. And it allows us to look at policy with wisdom, right? Yes. To see what are the possibilities that Chaplain Lee talks about, and to look at the visions that Elise has laid out and say, wow, how could we be present? Rather than telling us inside, you need to do this, you need to open the institution, you need to do, how about join with us, partner with us and say, how can we? How can we look at the options that are already existent, realizing that your primary job, your primary ministry is the safety and security of the individuals that are locked up because they don't have that right, and we have to preserve it.
If we pray, what else might we be able to engage in with our brothers and sisters until the opportunities represent themselves for us to go in and be mentors, for us to go back in and hold chorus or rec retreats? What might we do now?
I provide an individual mailing for everyone who has participated in any faith tradition once a week. I have volunteer groups who provide their homily, their message, their written prayers, and I individually address and mail out 400 pieces of mail every week to people. Providing those things to me so that if I come up short one week, or if that I'm not, beating the bushes to get your voice back to them, saying, this is from the rec group for your weekly reflection. That's one thing.
That's perfect. I'd ditto on that.
Yeah,
want to take I would ditto on that. We do too. We mail out hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information. So homilies, that if I can get a homily in, it's awesome, because they can't be at Mass, right? So if you've got a homily and you want to share it, please do so. I get faith traditions across the board that share with us every week, and every week we're generating thousands of pieces. We're killing a lot of trees.
Yes.
But we're doing good work by doing that. So I'm okay with that. If it was wasteful, it'd be a different story. I would also say, do things like I've opened the door, and I know Reverend Chaplain Lee has, and I know Elise is doing the same thing down there in Red Wing. We're trying to figure out ways in which we can get the message of connection into our institutions. And so we've opened up a video channel. So I'm inviting any and every faith tradition to offer me 30-minute videos, and we're going to try to put those on the Offender Network channel for an hour a night, so we can get 2 groups every night, so we can get some representation and we can get some stuff out there for the guys to participate in. And then educate yourself. Prayer is one thing, but making prayer active is another. So do something that helps you to understand what justice needs to happen within the confines of the institution and what it means even in your own life. It's a great question to ask ourselves. Elise, I don't want to. No?
I'm good.
A lot of energy, dude. I could keep going for a long time.
You nailed it.
He drinks coffee all day long.
I'd like to take this opportunity. We've gone a little bit over our time allotment today, but it is, I think, been an excellent exchange. I'd like to thank our panelists for their input today. And as a wrap-up for today's programming, we will be getting out answers to all of the questions that have been submitted. We will present those to the presenters and get back with everyone with answers. We'll also supply information from the chaplains on how to submit additional information for the publications that they put out. And as additional ideas come up, we hope that we'll be able to get back together and collectively begin to make a difference in this COVID world in which we all live. Thank you again for your time today, and we'll be in touch with you very soon.